The Starside Prophecy by Tirri. Read by the author. Chapter 4. Karmic Dispensation. Karmic dispensers have appeared throughout history, in utero and drop-in, dispatched when karma must be meted out. "It's a shit job but someone's got to do it" is the motto that rings true to most dispensers, ascended souls who return to Earth for controlled missions, and not because life there can teach them anything new. They are not bound by karmic law and are responsible for making sure select souls feel the exact measure of pain they previously caused another. The evolutionary journey of progressively becoming more plays out within a system of justice that is not sequestered to the afterlife. As people live their lives on Earth, karma is meted out all around them. Karma can come in any shape and form, and it does without exception, but not necessarily by the exact duplication of the action that caused it. The man who choked his wife for mouthing off to him last week might find himself subject to the same mistreatment in a bar brawl next Saturday, or he might be nearly garroted while working on a building site by a piece of rebar that some karmic dispenser strategically placed there. All dispensers possess a high degree of resilience as well as the capacity to remain impartial. Planet Earth has always been a violent place, but those required to keep the balance are absolutely indifferent to it. Some missions are comparatively tame, but the greater extent are not for the faint of heart, because they usually involve some grisly encounter to occur in response to the negative use of the free will that gave rise to the resultant karma. King Henry VIII of England is an example of someone who came face to face with several dispensers in subsequent lifetimes. None had gone well for him because none was supposed to. In one life he was the dear Henry of history, and in the next he was a missionary in Africa where he befriended a native he was hoping to civilize. He screamed when the dispenser, dressed in tribal attire and with smears of blue paint on his face, stabbed him in the kidneys with a jagged piece of rhino horn. During the next life, he was gang raped as a result of his sexual penchants as the famous Henry of history. In another, he was humiliated by a political opponent and took his own life. Gwynolyn, a senior dispenser, possessed the mental grit to do easily what most souls would consider terrifying. Some of Gwynolyn's missions were brief, but some were deep cover and protracted. Gwynolyn had long since been exposed to every depravity imaginable, as well as inflicting every depravity imaginable. With a slender, lean frame, jet black eyes and tumbling blonde hair, her appearance often caught the most corrupt souls off guard, an advantage when the prevalent state of mind of most of her targets ranged from deep mistrust to deep paranoia. Cain had promoted Gwynolyn to senior dispenser early on in her career because her proficiency was far beyond the norm. On the day of her promotion, Gwynolyn had asked Cain what he thought planet Earth would be like if a soul was appointed to live once and die once, and karma was not part of the operational system. His response was matter of fact. To live once and die once and then swiftly retire to an eternity of mediocrity would be to remain the same, to languish without aspiration, to stagnate without infinite prospect, to live without expectation, to be denied fulfillment of potential. This would be a horrific level of banality, infinitely worse, some might say, than the eternal torture some religions have imagined. No Godson would ever inflict that upon his creations, nor would he have been given the permission to do so. As for karma, Melchizedek could have created a forum for its expression between lifetimes. Life on Earth would then have appeared more benign, but this less fluid arrangement would have decreased the pace of a soul's ascension. Karmic recompense running concurrently with the day-to-day realities of life expedites a journey that many already find laborious. From then on, Gwynolyn had not thought too much more about the smaller picture. It was the bigger picture that had to be sustained. The Department of Karmic Justice for Parish 7 was situated on the west side of the square. Dispensers, along with their apprentices, could be seen coming and going all day, bounding up and down the steps, briefs in hand, stories on tap. Because karma was being balanced on Earth at an unprecedented rate now, the workload of all dispensers was at an all-time high. Gwendolen climbed the steps to the building and made her way through the lobby towards the elevator bank embedded in the far wall. She pressed the button for the 117th floor, and while she waited to be transported upward, she closed her eyes and stood on one foot. She had mastered every difficult yoga pose created. The briefing room, airy and the decor relaxed, was a complete juxtaposition to the nature of the work demanded. Gwendolen greeted her co-workers, most of whom were acquainting themselves with their current brief, with hugs and high-fives. Dispensers seldom discussed their work lives with those on the outside, many of whom just considered them plain weird, but they talked freely amongst themselves and exchanged stories to see who could outgross each other. To read a brief meant immediate immersion into the history of a soul's progression, which was always filled with drama and travesty, one scene after another, the physical mirror of what the thoughts of a soul had unwittingly manifested. Most read like fiction, but all were just standard and predictable accounts of those who did not have a clue about mental restraint, let alone understand that a system of justice was in place to teach them the importance of it. Gwendolen blew a kiss to a dispenser scheduled for a drop into Scotland. His target was an unwitting fellow named Hamish, who had just turned 24. Hamish was due to be stalked through the back streets of Glasgow in order that he experience the same fear he imposed upon a fellow factory worker in a previous lifetime in London. By the end of the evening, Hamish's throat would be cut. He would live, but the loss of blood would be severe and he would permanently lose his voice. It had been written into his life plan that if he came to accept his disability, he would learn sign language and teach others who had trouble communicating verbally. His guide had suggested that turning a negative situation into positive service for the greater good would ease the burden of this very challenging life. It would also allow his charge the opportunity to accrue positive karma. Several dispensers relaxed on a long plush sectional at one end of the briefing room. One, Orson, had been assigned an in utero mission and was saying goodbye to his co-workers. He would be gone for the next 19 years. Not just the length, but the tedium of Orson's mission called for a mental elasticity and saint-like patience. He was due to be born into a wealthy family of landowners in the Douro Valley of Portugal. His father was a nasty man with a lot of enemies, but would not expect his third son to be the worst of them. Around the time of Orson's 19th birthday, he would not be able to resist the impulse to act, a karmic dispensing tool called the seeding, and he would poison his father along with his father's 3 brothers and 2 of his male cousins. Upon completion of his mission, Orson would wake up in recovery and his life Starside would resume as normal. Back on Earth, a bounty on Orson's head would yield nothing, of course. In fact, a high percentage of cold case murders were a result of karmic dispensation, but most reeling from the headlines thought it was just another sick happening in a sick world. Gwendolyn's current assignment had been stapled together by her apprentice Lorena, and the 6-page brief was on the coffee table in front of Gwendolyn's favourite recliner. The brief was clear-cut enough, but the finer points needed to be digested. After getting through the 3rd paragraph, Gwendolyn put a finger down her throat, an exaggerated show of revulsion at a particularly unpleasant detail. Another dispenser looked over from his recliner and laughed. "Just the blink of an eye, Gwen," said Seviano, whose own brief wasn't exactly roses and rainbows. "The quicker karma gets dispensed, the quicker Earth will become a place for peaceful, loving expression, right, Sevi? Melchizedek told me himself," Gwendolen said dramatically. "Don't hold your breath, baby," said Seviano, rolling his eyes. He had never seen a more brutal training ground anywhere, and he had been to a lot of them. After scanning his brief, Seviano set it on the table. He was to impersonate a 2-bit criminal in Memphis, Tennessee. He would show up with a couple of teeth missing and the complexion and demeanour of someone in the rabid grip of a methamphetamine habit, although this mission required he employ the sniper skills of a seasoned assassin, which he was. A hunting rifle will be waiting at a rooming house on the outskirts of the city. One bullet was to kill and the other to maim, and he would be home by midnight. For the next 3 months, Sevillano was under contract with the Department of Karmic Justice, Parish 12. He was happy that he would be visiting the continent he had not been to since the Puritans landed. Apparently, a young man named Martin Luther King Jr. was spearheading a rally. When Sevillano had been in the Ascension program, he had been a slave, as well as one of England's indentured servants. There wasn't much difference. He was delighted the civil rights movement was making more headway than ever. About fucking time, he said as he crumpled up his brief, tossing it in the trash before picking up another one. Gwendolen smiled. Sevillano really had had his share of rough lifetimes, and his enthusiasm for balancing the scales of justice was palpable, even though he could sometimes be a bit jaded. Gwendolen stood up and tucked her brief under her arm and walked over to the refreshment area. She poured herself a cup of coffee and another for Sevillano, then took the mugs back to the seating area. As they blew on the hot steaming liquid, both dispensers were again absorbed in their respective briefs, but not unaware of a tall dark-haired man who had just entered the room. Justinian's 6'6" muscular body, his dimpled cheeks and chiselled jawline caused admiring looks wherever he went. Gwendolen's boyfriend was wearing jeans and a white polo, and in his arms lay a bouquet of Aurelian lilies. He walked over to where the two dispensers were sitting. "Wow, how nice, mate, thank you," said Sevillano, reaching for the flowers. Justinian laughed as he pulled the flowers from Sevillano's grasp and laid them on Gwendolen's lap. He then leaned forward and kissed her on both cheeks. Sevillano had always thought Justinian was a little too good-looking and a little too cocky and a little too hot-headed. But if he'd had to pick someone to be marooned on a desert island with, it would have been him. Justinian liked to project the image of hot-shot bad boy and believed himself to be irresistible to the ladies, who indeed did have a hard time not drooling over him. But Justinian was kind and steadfast and loyal, and always did what he said he was going to do. Justinian, or 007 as Sevillano liked to call him, had just arrived back from Beauvais, France. His mission had been a drop-in with orders to hit an oncoming car. His car had been waiting for him at a designated station on the main trunk road leading into the city. It had been placed there by his apprentice. Justinian had transferred straight into the driver's seat, discreetly out of view. It was a rainy day in northern France, and apart from the magnificent cathedral and a few other buildings, the architecture of the place was lacklustre and possessed the standard drabness associated with a quick, unimaginative reconstruction. World War II had obliterated much of the north, and Justinian much preferred the unobliterated south. On schedule, Justinian saw the young driver of the Peugeot heading towards him at about 50 miles an hour. He swerved his car into its oncoming path with the intent of getting the attention of the young Frenchman heading towards him. It worked. The young Frenchman instinctively yanked the wheel, and just before he ploughed into an elm tree, he felt the same wide-eyed fear as the young black gentleman he had mowed down in December of 1947 in a previous life in Andalusia, Alabama. The man, William, was walking home after a hard day's work in the fields when a Klan member hit William with his pickup truck at 50 miles an hour, leaving him dead on the side of the road. The Klansman got drunk that night to celebrate with his friends who had cheered him on. According to them all, the dirty young shit had no business being on the same road white men used. 3 months later, the young Klansman died of consumption and was reborn the following year in France. His karma came to him at age 20, and Justinian was pleased that it had only taken a few minutes to execute. Justinian had abandoned the car he had used for the mission on the side of the road, and that afternoon it was towed to a local garage owned by a man affectionately known as Monsieur Voiture. Monsieur Voiture was delighted with his new and unexpected acquisition. No registration papers could be located, so, when no one claimed the car, he did. A few months later, Monsieur Voiture drove the Renault down to the Riviera, and as he and his wife sat on the promenade eating escargot, he raised his glass to his wife. Monsieur Voiture was unaware that he had a very large account of good karma, and the unexpected procurement of the car was just a fraction of it. He had not yet found the wad of money stashed in the glove compartment, and he did not yet know that his wife was pregnant with the son he had been praying for. Justinian inquired about Gwendoline's current assignment, a quick drop-in to dispense karma in Lisbon. Gwendoline had been to Lisbon many times, and so she could find her way around the city with the same ease as someone born and raised there. Nevertheless, Justinian told her about a little hole-in-the-wall restaurant, Andolino's, where the owner made the best flan around. In several hours, Gwendoline would transfer, accompanied by a baseball bat, to an empty warehouse near the docks. For now, she had a few hours to do as she pleased, and Justinian was taking her out to dinner.